winning is just a matter of how you look at it.
So, the latest Pixar project came out today, and I'll be honest, I was kinda hyped for it in the lead up to this movie. It's not even a movie, it's a TV series. Pixar is currently be going through a little bit of an era right now where they're releasing TV series directly to Disney+. And though they've fumbled in the past with the likes of Monsters at Work, their most recent release was a real big triumph. That was Pixar's Dream Productions, a spin-off expansion based off of the Inside Out universe that I think is really, really solid. Not just because it does all the more emotion-related puns, and also, of course, gives us a kind of hint preview knockoff version of Riley as an older teenager. I just think in general, that show was pretty neat. And so hearing that there is another one being made by Pixar, kind of going through development hell for a few months as well, since we've heard about the marketing for ages, I came into this with pretty high hopes, to the point I even forgot one of the major controversies attached to this series. Today, I finally got to see some of this series, and it is not Dream Productions quality.
This is good, because it's high stakes, and that's the kind we like.
This is Win or Lose, a sports-based TV series that actually does some interesting things beyond just being a baseball movie, but in long form. And in a lot of ways, I really like the concept of where some of this series goes. Because surprise, surprise, this is actually an anthology series. Every single episode has a different main protagonist central to the plot of that piece, and it all takes place over the same week. This series has that classic overlapping story format, which honestly is my absolute favorite thing. I love Hoodwinked for it, I love Odd Taxi for it, I love Attack on Titan for it. And to see it being done with their Pixar 3D animation style, mwah! I want to consume all of this and then re-edit it in chronological order. I eat this stuff up. However, almost every other aspect of this series of what I've seen so far is unimpressive, and I'm uninterested.
It's so mean!
But we'll start things off as the series starts off. Let's just talk only about the first episode for a bit. This one is entirely centric on the sweaty girl. The premise is this is all part of a baseball team. Each character has their own things going on in life, and it'll all come together for the whole championship match at the end of the week. And she is meant to be the archetypal, anxious, shy character in the middle of everything going on. We get a nice preview of the ending of the week at the very start with a whole bunch of out-of-context clues for some of the other characters involved in this whole anthology series. And then we get to see the actual trials of this kid, who has some nice ideas. You can see what they're going for, but I can't help but feel that this is entirely a crossfade compilation of all the things you've seen before and Pixar themselves have already done before. There are many, many, many baseball movies. You know the plotline of a baseball movie. There's a character that keeps swinging for the ball and doesn't get it, and that's very stressful. You've also heard the type where the coach is the father. The coach is the father in this. There's an element of, oh, their father is disappointed in them and sort of butts them out of the way in places. There's a cooler character that's more successful at a baseball game. There's certainly a lot to say about that star athlete in this series that we'll get to later on. And though there are occasional unique things about it, like the coach giving sign language and then going on for a nice little heart-to-heart with his daughter and then doing a pretty classic standard sign language joke, the real kicker for this episode and this character is the fact that their anxiety manifests in the form of a growing blob of sweat. A big, sweaty character that is the embodiment of anxiety. As if you took the concept of anxiety and turned it into a character to put into a Pixar TV series. Do you see where I'm going with this first episode and why I'm not impressed? Not only is this a concept we literally have already done with Pixar in the last year alone, it's also just far inferior. It is so diluted down and basic that this is the most generic take of a baseball anxiety blob character Pixar concept, TV series, story.
I'll just see myself in. Thanks, excuse me. Can you move?
The most creative thing I can find in this episode, really, is the fact that there's a lot of film grain in this show, and I don't know why that is. It's just a stylistic choice. And you'd think maybe with a growing sweat character, they're kind of going to be a semi-protagonist of their own. They're going to have some of the biggest quotable lines in the whole show. No. I'm not even sure if this character is played for laughs. Every line they say doesn't really have a hint of comedy in it. They have a couple lines, that are faintly, yeah, this is... but it's just really, really simplistically done. Now, there's a whole theme to this series that is pretty clear to be expressed out of the show, and it's the idea that everyone's going through their own things, and you don't know what they're going through. Everyone has their own problems, their own perspectives. It's nice that later on we'll see the same events repeated, but with a different lens of how each character acted. Surprise, surprise, you're not going to see the sweaty blob in anyone else's point of view. But at the same time, for this to be the very first episode, there's not much to hop on here other than, oh yeah, kids will get the idea of shyness and anxiety and pressure, but there are way far more many options that would be a far superior version of showing this idea. Of course, the animation's great. There's a couple really good cinematography shots. I like the mid to long length shots they've got in there in places. And I like the fact that obviously we're going to interact with all sorts of other characters that are the protagonists of their own episodes later on. As I said, I eat all this stuff up, but while I love the concept and the formatting of the storyline, I'm looking at this and I just see a knockoff of Chicken Little. That's the biggest... That's not a good comparison, you know? Or when we do move on to other problems going on, like the fact that they failed in a baseball game, what do you know? Someone filmed it and now it's become an internet meme. That most basic, cliched, outdated idea that I've seen so many times, I feel even the kids of today that this show is aiming for is not going to find it relatable because that's such an older version of the internet. That's kind of a millennial take on how internet meme culture manifests. I don't know if it's such a Gen Z thing these days. Anyway, as the plot goes, this character's not very good at baseball. They decide to go into hardcore training with their anxiety sweat character pushing them to train all the more. It is literally just those beats from Inside Out 2 with a far inferior version that's not Maya Hawke. She trains, there's a couple scenes on the in-betweens, she trains some more, she does faintly better, and then it's game night. I do appreciate that the actual finale is seen in this first episode, and all of the episodes. I kind of thought it was going to be that we would see all the first 6 days of the week repeated by everyone's perspective, and then the final episode is the final day with everyone combined. No, we just go basically straight to the end game, which is like, nice. Again, I like the format more than I like the story. And then we get to the emotional swell of the episode, which is, you know, an attempt, but when it's also a TV series that covers this in about 25 minutes, you lose the impact of that emotion because it's not well established enough, it's not given enough time to breathe. But her coach father then gives her a pep talk that allows the sweat to disappear, and she's able to do the action she wants to do. For a first episode, it's just your most basic cliche idea that you've seen done before by Pixar, and is a really bad first impression to the series, because it's not even like the best version of its tale. I think really the biggest disappointment for this first episode is the sweat character themselves doesn't get any room to grow beyond physically. I want to see more fun interactions to play around with. Maybe I just want more comedy in my serious story. I don't know. Because if it's meant to be a message for kids of, you can clear your anxiety if you have a good father, then maybe in that regard, you could tell that message better. And this, it feels like a overly kiddie version that simplifies things down too far in a way that doesn't really respect the intelligence of its audience the way that Inside Out 2 does, which is covering the very same topics and will be a theme for this whole series as a whole, that their demographic aiming is a little bit skew-if, but we'll get there as we get there. Anyway, if there's anything close to a good plotline here, it's the punchline, it's not a punchline, it's the plot twist. She wallops the ball with her face, not with the bat. Wahoo. Would have been helpful if they didn't spoil that in the literal first shot of the show entirely, and you could see it's the same person. You know, otherwise that kind of ruins your one highlight of the episode, because you know the ending from the start. Maybe you're meant to not notice it, but I think it's kind of, you know, visible. But going into episode 2, I think the series really starts to show its teeth and show a little bit more what it's all about. Not that that is necessarily a good thing. Because you see, the second episode is all about the teacher character here. They are the umpire of the game. And notably, they are not a child. They are an adult in this world, again having their own problems, faintly smarter in the fact of, kids can now see a little bit of the behind the scenes as being an adult and understand that they've got things as well. Maybe their teachers don't live in schools. That's cool. But also, then at that point, what is the message you're trying to tell here? Because the storyline of this guy is he's lonely. and he's having romantic issues, and he's dealing with the fact that he's come to an end of a long-term relationship with a woman who wanted to get married with him, and he couldn't handle that responsibility. You know, it's a slightly bigger theme than just general romance and relationships that's more aimed towards adults than it is the young kid audience that you're aiming for. If you're going to dilute an anxiety premise down to its really weakest points, why is the next episode so focused on this sort of more existential loneliness and learning how to get into online dating as a 30, 40-year-old? Meeting strangers online in a way that I feel like their audience also isn't doing as much, because this is aimed for kids who probably meet people at school. This whole episode is a Tinder representation. Also, I think, kind of a little bit millennial, a little bit outdated. Maybe, what do I know? I don't online date anymore. But it felt very old school in its formatting already for being 2025. Now, what is nice is some of the actual visual highlights of this show. Whilst the sweaty blob character gave no real verbal additions to the episode, the visuals were at least nice, but the visuals here, also quite nice, also kind of basic. This guy is a guarded guy. He's very defensive, he's very doubling down on his points, he doesn't compromise at all, which is a nice piece of theming there, sure. And also he has this visuals of a kind of 8-bit inspired video game aesthetic. Conceptualizing that as this is what online dating is like, you level up as you gain more hearts and connect with someone on a deeper level is, yeah, I guess a way you can kind of gamify the concept. But again, it feels kind of bland and also basic and also not accurate to moderner times. The guy's being introduced to Tinder for the first time, and Tinder started in 2012. Not sure how relevant it is to the kid audience you're building. But anyway, it is interesting to see all the different interactions he has with different characters. He knows one of the kids, he interacts with one of the kids' mothers, obviously he knows the coach dad who's another teacher, and he's got a constant thing of always being attacked by somebody as the umpire, with parents always shooting shots at him. Even his car gets egged, which is a nice visual little punchline I quite liked. It was a silent one, it was a subtle one. Anyway, while I think this guy's quite a generic basic, oh look, he's a lonely nerd character. He likes nerdy things, and books, and video games. My actual real favorite character in this series pops up in this episode. It's the janitor, who has this absurd, slippery vibe to him. He can teleport into any scene he wants. He's the archetype of that idea of a janitor knows everything. They just know everything going on at the school. I adore him. I think he is the highlight of the whole series that I've seen so far. And great fun times. He helps out the guy, giving him dating advice, giving him the dating online app, and is rooting for him as a wingman.
That's what? Hey, give me my phone. Frankie Pooh, it's not that difficult.
He's my favorite guy. He's able to lean into the actual comedic elements of this show that's not just cringe or unsuccessful, and he comes with this nice, absurd visual aesthetic that generally, visually, this show does very, very well. I think that's the biggest highlight. Good to witness with your eyes. Don't listen to it. Yeah, it's more the directing that's got more creative flourishes, and sometimes that bleeds out into lines, like this guy being called out with the line going, "Frank, you're single. Your single dose latte, here it is." I'm like, that's nice. It's also here we see that weird cashier lady from the trailers, the one with no nose. Her whole thing is she's really friendly as a coffee worker. He asks her out, doesn't work out. All the cringe awkwardness in the world. It's also an opportunity to repeat the jokes you've already made even sooner recently in the Pixar itinerary, as they make more "I can make screenplays now that I'm a coffee cashier worker" jokes that we literally saw 2 months ago. And hey, why not? Let's chuck in that gag from Elemental as well, of burning their mouth on a hot thing. It's like, this seems like a series that has been drip-fed all of the remains or the highlights of some of the past Pixar projects to put something together that's good, it's in a nice format, but you've seen it all before, even by the same people. It's like, ugh. The substance is missing. I only like the timeline. And if you're trying to rely on the jokes and the humor, they tell a cashier can't say the name of the name correctly at the coffee shop joke.
So sorry. Have a great day, scene. Sean, I'm sorry.
Wow. I think the only other real highlight of this episode in particular is at least the visual of actually getting a connection with someone online, where their chat log is slowly getting bigger as they have more heartful conversations and talk more. I think that's a really nice visual for that romantic progression. What's the theming of that character? I don't know. They tell a pun of someone ghosting them earlier, and this character that we never really get to see properly just gets chucked away at the end of the episode, as if to say, hey, online dating. Ain't that funny? Stick to traditional in person, because I'm old and I don't understand this format. And the guy chooses to go for someone in real life instead. Not to say that, like, you know, you have to double down if you've established an online dating episode, but, like, it does feel a little bit like, tradition. Let's stick to the tradition. It's gotta be someone in real life. I don't know. Because, yeah, at the end, he cuts off this woman, goes to his ex, who he's been umming and ahhing about this whole time. There's this great moment of him going towards her with the janitor again helping out with that, icing sport, which is just really, really fun. There's a couple other flares that are in there for some reason, flying over cheerleaders. Yeah, okay, the visuals are nice, as I said before. And I do like the idea of him slowly taking off all of his guarded ailments to be open to new experiences, just for a final line to be, yeah, be emotionally vulnerable. I like the subtler background stuff, apparently. And then we get another plot twist climax ending of an episode that you can predict again from the beginning of the first episode, because they showed very much in your face that this guy is sad in the final day and is just having a horrible time. What do you know? The ex moved on. Whoa. And out of the 8 episodes that Win or Lose has to show, that quarter is all we have so far.
How about you?
Now, I don't know how often Disney Plus has been doing the slower rollout of episodes. We're going to get 2 episodes every week from now on, and I'll probably make an extending video on each of those too. But I do want to talk about some of these future episodes, because I think a lot of them are still relevant in this early opinion building of this show. And that is just the fact that this is a horrible first impression. You've given us an incredibly basic, diluted down, generic storyline that doesn't really have good humor or creative storytelling to it. And then you got a second one that similarly has a sort of outdated take on dating with a weird theming to aim towards children if that's what you're doing, considering the first one was so diluted down. And according to some of the choices they make later, yeah, this demographic's getting a little bit confused because, and I'll talk about this drama a lot more in detail when we actually get to it, one of the bigger controversies around this show that I completely forgot about in the latest trailer, I apologize, I'm good at blocking out bad news, I guess. It's a good skill these days, is the fact that one of these future characters that we've seen has been absolutely gutted on the cutting room floor compared to what they were first meant to be, while showing us a completely diluted down, simplistic, pretty uncreative show so far, beyond the directing and the visuals. We were going to learn that one of the problems of one of the future children is the fact that they are transgender, and they're handling at least their gender identity as part of one of the things they're dealing with on the side. And when you're thinking about the theme of, hey, what message are we telling to our audience, this is a really good, integral, important one to discuss. It's a form of representation that would make this series stand out against the crowd, and it is a real one that genuine children and teenagers have experienced and would be worth exploring. However, as you probably can assume, this has been gutted out by Disney. And pretty late in the storyline as well, as it had all pretty much been put in place, and even the casting choice for the character of Kai is transgender themselves, and have come out and said, this is horrendous, we've been working on this for 4 years, the whole element of the character is gone, and I feel underrepresented now. Very valid, of course. To back out last minute only comes off as nothing less than cowardly. And without getting too preachy, in these kind of times, it's more important than ever, and only acts to define the current legacy of your company. Essentially, Disney came out with a statement and said, if we're telling these messages to children, we're aware of the fact that parents might not want us to explain these kind of themes to children and would rather cover it themselves. And while there's all sorts of room for disagreement, it does sound like, if anything, this is the parents' fault, but also the company for actually, you know, doubling down on the parents' take. But hey, considering we're at a point where teachers are actually being berated by obnoxious parents, I guess I'm not surprised in that sense. But considering the end result we've seen so far is just an incredibly diluted down first episode, which is just abysmally unintelligent to explore for a kid, and then the other one is an adult relationship that kids can't really relate to and understand. And we also hear that future things are going to talk about divorce and parenting problems like that, which is a big sort of heavier topic for kids to conceptualize around. To say that transgender issues is one that's too above for kids to hear from us just feels like an insult to that demographic, to say, let's give them the more basic generic schlop that someone's already done, diluted down and better in another form. What? Just chuck them Chicken Little again. Whilst at the same time, considering this is being introduced so very late, very much shows that this is not necessarily a writer's issue or a producer's issue. This is a higher up getting scared that it's going to affect the bottom line in a way that actively starts to stab some of its own audience members in the back. Because the fact remains, whether you want to talk about it or not, trans kids exist. And to actively stop the representation of these people is to actively backstab some demographic of your audience who presumably do watch your stuff. At the very least, because they've announced it and we know which character it is and we know their name and they get a dedicated episode, it does mean that they can't stop us from headcanoning the fact that it's still real anyway. Art is art and you can perceive it however you want, so hey, the seeds are already planted. You might end up with a inferior storyline that's going to be diluted down and not do the character justice, but we know who they really are. And at the same time, we're learning all the more about the company itself. Not that it should be a surprise. While this show is meant to be a real theme of, everyone's going through something, you don't know what they're going through, here's a bunch of examples they could be going through and how they can explore it, hey, something here might help you. The fact of the matter is, this series isn't doing a great job in its first 2 episodes as an introduction, and it's not going to do a good job overall because it's not fully representing a lot of the people it wanted to present, and is just giving you slapped together versions of, oh, look at this. It's just bad overall. None of this is to say that the writers themselves are bad, or the animators, or the actual creators, but on a big scale of things, and as the final product, this series is just far, far miles down below the highlights of Dream Productions. And maybe it's because Dream Productions has a abstract idea that has all sorts of puns to play off of, and this is a personal story. Going back to that whole Disney is cutting out directors and their personal stories thing, but the real injustice is the fact that these personal stories aren't being given justice themselves enough. Pixar has shown that they can do an anxiety story, and this version isn't it. Pixar has shown that they can do romance a million times over, but this felt a little bit outdated and naff. And as we get into the later things, I'm gonna love the fact that the timeline loops back over itself and you can see all these details and I want to rearrange the show, but in actually expecting intellectual messaging and theming that can be sent to children and I assume teenagers? What is the demographic here? There's themings here that seem to be more for adults and parents. So is it young kids that can't handle these bigger topics, or is it skewed towards teenagers because it's relevant? Honestly, I don't know what it's going for, and maybe it's because of these last-minute meddlings by the big managers up top that make this show so unimpactful. It's a nice visual flourish, a weird little artistic style coming from Pixar. Why does that lady not have a nose? I don't know. But after hyping it up as the likes of, ooh, this could be the next big Dream Productions, turns out it's just, it's more on the lose side than it is on the win. I, at the very least, will keep watching the 2 episodes each week and probably make a little pop-up video review about it, if you're at least interested in hearing more. But even politics that shouldn't really count as politics aside, this show's just pretty naff overall. And knowing that there is such a cutting room floor only makes me more interested to learn about the cancelled version of this series that could have had all the more potential. So we'll just have to see if something like that exists sometime in the future. For now though, that's my thought on the series. It was only an hour long anyway, because they're releasing them slowly, in a format that also you would assume wants you to binge it all at once, because it's based on the same events on loop. You know, you kind of want to see the whole thing as a 3-hour stint, rather than forgetting all the self-referential bits from the episode before, because they're also intrinsically linked over. Whatever, it's a big problem, not the creators on the ground. I'm going to end it off there before I get even more grumbly about the micro details of what this show does and doesn't have to share. For now though, my name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this review. Do tell me your thoughts on Win or Lose. Did you see it? What do you think? Do you want to see me do follow-up reviews for every 2 episodes, or should I format it differently? Maybe like a big chunk at the end? Let me know your thoughts, but otherwise, I shall see you all in a little bit. Bye-bye. I didn't say bye. Bye-bye. Not bye-bye.